Hello, welcome back to Read the World. My name is Derek Main and I review translated literature. And today, from one of my favorite presses, we have A Musical Offering by Louis Sagasti, translated by Fionn Petch. And if you cannot tell from the distinctive and beautiful covers, this is Charco Press. So Charco Press is one of those presses, and this book is one of those examples where I'm at the point where I'll try it all. I think I'll just read it all. And the reason I say this book is one of those examples because at first blush, when I read about this book, I was like, I'm not sure if I'll be interested in it. It is sort of nonfiction. It deals with 5 to 6 different topics, music being the primary thing putting it together, and in fact specifically Glenn Gould's final version of the variations of Bach's Goldberg variations. You'll see me looking down because I'm not super familiar with this stuff until I read this. And so I think it's 1982, Glenn Gould records for the second time. The first time was like 40 years earlier or something. He records his final version of these variations, and the book somewhat is about that, somewhat moves in and out of stories dealing with Japanese soldiers that kept fighting the World War II after it was long gone, the Beatles, Rothko, a grandma who is telling stories to her kids to make them fall asleep, and then another storyteller who is telling stories to an emperor or king or prince, I can't recall exactly which, in order to help him fall asleep, and also the original Goldberg variations helping another emperor or king fall asleep. These things are kind of melding, and it is sort of an ambient nonfiction in a way. There is a structure to it that reveals itself, I think, as you read the book, but it would be more helpful, I think, to appreciate the structure if you were very familiar with the variations, Goldberg's variations specifically. But I think it's fairly clear that the structure is in some way circuitous in that mode. But it's just a joy to read. The little stories, the little tidbits, even with things that otherwise, like I'm going to give you an example of the Beatles. I'm not someone interested in the Beatles. Like I've seen and read, we've all, like, I feel like just inundated with the Beatles, like there wasn't any music past it, you know? And so those are stories and stuff I'm not terribly interested in. And yet Sagasti has found a way to put some in that are they're new and they're a little interesting, and there's small subtle moments instead of these sort of big, large, grand narratives that we've come to know. Same thing with Rothko. I mean, he's not so interested, I feel, in Rothko the artist as in or rather the human being, but in Rothko and how his art is a commodity and valued. And we follow the sale, actually, of a yellow Rothko piece from the time that it was first painted all the way until present day, and who owns it. And it's fascinating because it just like keeps moving from bank vault to bank vault, millions and millions of dollars, like, and no one sees it. It's an investment piece now. It's not a piece of art in a way, at least not one that anyone gets to enjoy. I think the latest sale was to someone where we don't know, so maybe it is in someone's home and they're enjoying it. Jackson Pollock, another artist, talking a lot, mostly about his method and about sort of what his take is on art. And all of these things are in very brief, I don't know how easily you're going to be able to see this, but probably very brief sort of paragraph form, and you're kind of going from one thing to the next, and it really kind of melds within you in this very aesthetically pleasing, intellectually pleasing, stimulating way. I loved the writing so much. As soon as I finished this, I ordered Fireflies, his first book that Charco Press put out his first English translation that they put out. And I can't wait to read it. I really actually appreciate it on the back. One of the blurbs is from Gary Perry of Foils. Sagasti is one of the most remarkable writers at work today. I just wanted to say briefly, Gary Perry is someone that I first started following on Twitter as like an influential reader that I just loved. And I think he's backed away from that social media platform, and I mean, who can blame him, right? But I just love seeing a press that is brave enough, cool enough to put like booksellers, and those types of readers as their blurb, like, as opposed to it always having to be like, here's a more famous author telling you that this book is good. You know what I mean? And that stuff's fine too. And some authors are great readers, but not all of them are. And anyway, I mean, booksellers are the best readers we've got. So to see that kind of commendation to me is a big deal. And I like that they're brave and cool enough to do that. I know I wish more presses would. So this is a map, it's a key, it's a guide. I mean, there's sort of all those like ways that you can describe the book, but it's really can only be appreciated being read, because it is very different. Fantastic translation by Fionn Petch to be able to grab that sense. I really kind of felt like I was sitting next to the writer and the translator, and we were I'm imagining an older writer. I don't know how old Sagasti is, so if he's very young, I apologize. So I'm imagining an older writer, and I'm sitting at a workbench as maybe he has a record player or something, and I'm interviewing, and I'm going to ask him one question, okay? And it doesn't matter what the question is, but I ask him one question, let's say something very bland that a journalist would start with, and Sagasti ignores that question and puts on some music. He puts on Gold's variations, of course, and then from there he starts speaking, and Fionn Petch starts translating to me what he's saying. And what he's saying is what ends up here, and I kept thinking about that, and it's really like you do get that close to the vision of the writer, and the translator, of course, does that. So I am going to deal with 3 things that I thought this did really well, and give 3 examples of them: story, structure, and meaning. And within this work, there is a story, and the stories, there's multiple ones, okay, and they're nonfiction, they're true, and those stories are very interesting and unique and quirky and fun. Like, you laugh at some are just like, whoa, really? That's really interesting, and take you down a further rabbit hole. And I think that's one of the real beauties of this work, is that it is begging you to dig deeper, okay, into any aspect of it. So those stories. Then the second part, the structure, which I've mentioned, like, we've got a structure that is based on a piece of music. And so I want to, and the structure is very important, like, from any sort of like critical theory aspect. I think the structure is probably the most important aspect of the book. And then third, the meaning, because imbued in this, Sagasti does get an opportunity, I feel, and does use it to not just go like nonfiction, but to insert some meaning from these stories and his experience and his skill as a writer. And so we'll follow those 3 paths. The first one is story. And what I mean by story is, I'm going to read a brief section that just gives you a sense of how this is written and how interesting these little tidbits can be. This is from page 39. Oh, that's structure, sorry. This is from page 17. Gould suffers from insomnia. He spends hours talking on the phone as though he's only able to communicate through pure sound. He pays no attention to time zones when he calls. More than once, his interlocutors have fallen asleep in the middle of his endless monologues. Today, it's thought he had a degree of Asperger's, perhaps because this is the cause ascribed to everything that wasn't accurately diagnosed at the time, that or being bipolar. Farther back, it would have been neurasthenia. neurasthenia. In any case, we should imagine Gould night after night staring out the window at the forest not far from Toronto, with the receiver stuck to his ear and a woman on the other end to whom he's unable to utter a word when she's standing in front of him. So the first word that comes to mind there is delight, right? Like, it's so freaking delightful and enjoyable to read, and it's like a warm freaking quilt or blanket over you as you're just like being told these stories, you know? And so there's my example of story. I love the idea of him like outside Toronto looking at a forest, just calling and calling. There's something of Truman Capote there. I don't know if you ever, years and years ago, I saw a one-man play. This was even before like they made that movie that Philip Seymour Hoffman is with Truman Capote, and the whole play was him picking up the phone and just calling and gossiping. I like loved it. All right, page 39 is structure, and this tidbit I use as an example of the way that things interconnect and flow together. The Beatles had already finished Revolver, and Japanese soldiers from World War II were still being discovered defending deserted islands in the Pacific Ocean, buried in impenetrable jungles. These soldiers weren't frozen in time, rather they had come to the point of greatest tension that life has in store for us, before returning like an elastic band recovering its shape, further and further back until they reach those very first mornings. Dwellers in stillness, attentive to the slightest sign of an omnipresent enemy, lacking any instrument to play music with. A starving dog on alert, a 25-year-long day. There were many such cases of lost Japanese soldiers. There were 3 million soldiers in the Pacific, after all. Of course, we only know about the ones who were found. The body becomes autonomous. It regulates thinking. And a regulated thought is anything but a thought. The last Japanese soldier to be found was called Hiro Onoda. The band from Liverpool had already split up 4 years before that happened. So that's my example and piece on structure. And let's end with meaning. And the one with meaning, perhaps unsurprising for a reader such as myself that is just constantly searching for his own meaning. This is my favorite section of the whole work, and I think it speaks so well to the power and beauty of Sagasti and a musical offering. And I think you can pretty well predict that here within the next 6 months I will review Fireflies as well, even though that's an earlier work, because I am enchanted with this writer and this voice. And thanks again to Charco and to Fionn Petch for putting this out there. There are no animals. There is a power, or whatever we want to call it, that neither increases nor diminishes. All the power of all the animals in the world is exactly equivalent to that of the first living cell. There's nothing more than this. No new matter has been created since the Big Bang. And this power takes the form of a giraffe or a jellyfish, swallows itself up, recreates itself, flees itself, alienates itself, becomes a mouth that wants to bite itself. Everything is pain and pleasure at once. Something similar happens with music, nor are there plants. Thank you again so much for watching my reviews. As always, I'm going to encourage you strongly to read Louis Sagasti, in particular, A Musical Offering. If you've read this or Fireflies, drop some comments, let me know, let's have a discussion. As always, be good to folks.